Hello and welcome into the GSMC Sports Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host TJ Mabardi. We are coming to you live today on a Thursday afternoon. Today is October 3rd and we are going to be diving into yesterday's MLB playoff action. We got some results from the wild card series. Saw a trend at least get bucked. A lot of people complaining about the playoff format that the MLB has introduced over the past couple seasons, but we do have a Game 3 in this wild card series, so we're going to be talking about the surprising upset results of both the Tigers and Royals taking down two of the top World Series contenders heading into this season. We will talk about the Brewers being able to extend that series to a Game 3 that will be played tonight against the Mets. Then additionally, the Padres are moving on to face the division rival Dodgers, so that series should be extremely exciting. We'll talk about where sort of some of these other teams that are now eliminated go from here and such. So we're going to be talking about MLB to start the show, and then we are going to be diving into some NFL Thursday night football tonight between division rivals in the Atlanta Falcons and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So we're going to be talking about some of the keys to the game, and ultimately I will be making my prediction. And then we are going to be handing out my edition of this week's Power Rankings, the top 10 teams in the NFL heading into Week 5. So I'll be running through that. And then finally, we're going to end the show by talking about the Davante Adams trade situation and evaluating some of the top landing spots that have been rumored up to this point in the process. So we're going to be diving into all of that, but before we do so, do want to just take a moment to remind you to like, follow, subscribe wherever you keep up with us. To any of our live viewers, be sure to use the comment section and give us your thoughts on the latest happenings in sports, whether it is a quick comment or a thoughtful question. We want to hear what you have to see, so do not hesitate to use that chat in order to let us know, and we try and make the show as interactive as possible. And then additionally, if you would like to become a bigger part of the show, you can use the super chat feature that is available on YouTube by clicking the $ at the bottom of the chat box, or you can go to the link that is streaming across the bottom ticker, gsmcpodcast.net. Anything would be greatly appreciated on either end there. We're going to start off the show today diving into the American League side of the MLB playoff bracket, as we got the final results in two series and we got a couple upsets as well. As you know, a lot of people do have their share of complaints about the playoff format at this point. At the same time, you have multiple chances to defend home field, and both the Astros and the Orioles were unable to do so, both of them getting swept by the lower seeded Tigers and Royals. So we're going to be diving into both of those series. We're going to start with Astros versus Tigers, where this is a situation, the big bad Astros, for the first time, and I believe it is 9 seasons, will not be in the ALCS, and we're going to potentially see, a new face in the World Series picture. So as for this game, I understand under the playoff format and everything, maybe the Astros shouldn't have even been playing in this series. At the same time, the Astros won 88 games to the Tigers winning 86. You look at, that's really, I understand you end up having one of the better records in the conference, but that being said, I kind of stand by the idea that make these teams earn it, and the Astros did not this time around. They had sort of what felt like a golden opportunity to do so just based off of the pitching matchups. They got through Tarek Skubal. They ended up losing that game, building up some momentum in the 9th inning, it felt like, offensively, and yet still kind of came out flat in this game. You have Hunter Brown against a bullpen day in Detroit, and your offense just does not show up for you in the series as a whole. It was the lone run in the ninth inning of game one. You end up getting two in this game to keep things more competitive. You take the lead in that seventh inning in a massive moment. You are going up against a rookie pitcher in Jackson Jobe to be able to do a little bit of damage there, and yet ultimately it was not enough. And you look at the situation as well where you come into the eighth inning now with a lead 2-1 over an inexperienced Tigers team on the road, backs against the wall, and if Tarek Skubal yesterday is talking about the amount of pressure that he was feeling in his start, how do you think a lot of these, other pitchers that aren't quite as established are feeling? And ultimately, it is the falling apart, really, of the experienced Astros bullpen members, talking about a Ryan Presley and a Josh Hader that ultimately goes awry. You just can't really blame the system for that, I don't think. It's about execution at the end of the day. And again, if you want to make the argument that they shouldn't have even been playing the games, I don't really know what to tell you in that situation. And the Orioles is probably more so the team in this situation. But I just feel like, I don't know, I'm for more baseball, and the Astros just kind of have to blame themselves. Again, lack of offensive execution. You have Yordan Alvarez really as one of the only players to show up for the Astros offense in this series, and he's playing on one knee. Now, Alex Bregman, of course, ended up having a pretty good 2 games as well, Yanier Diaz, so it's not like they were entirely absent, but this is a situation where I think you just have to tip your cap to the Tigers for what they were able to do. They were the ones who got in front of the Astros in each of these first 2 games. Parker Meadows ultimately had a very impactful series. He's the one who ends up hitting the go-ahead home run early in this game, able to sort of let the Tigers settle into this situation, even with the changes at bullpen and the fact that, they were basically throwing everything up against a wall and seeing what clicked for them. And they had a golden opportunities, the Astros did, to continue to pile on in that seventh inning when Jackson Jobe comes out of the bullpen. Was very surprising, at least, in my opinion, to see him after having 4 MLB Major League innings pitched in his career, 3 of them coming against the Chicago White Sox, so that might as well have been against a minor league team, basically. And it was a very rough outing for him, and he obviously, that's one that he's going to want to put behind him, where he allows the bases to get loaded. But that being said, there was a massive moment there, bases loaded, no outs, Jose Altuve at the plate, and ultimately he hits a sac fly, so it wasn't an unproductive at-bat, but credit Jackson Jobe, because that could have gone so much worse than it actually did. And it was a pretty shallow sac fly as well, if it weren't for the fact that Vierling didn't exactly field it great. It was pretty shallow in foul territory, so he doesn't handle it quite as cleanly. Jeremy Pena, obviously one of the fastest players in baseball. He's able to tag up and get home there. But again, could have been a lot worse for the Tigers in that situation. Again, Jobe, definitely not one that he's going to be putting on his mantle, but facing Jose Altuve after all the damage that he has done throughout his postseason career, able to get out of that moment is absolutely massive for them. And it's the Tigers, this team that feels like, they might be a little bit of this Cinderella run. They start the postseason off strong. They now go on to face their division rivals in the Guardians next round, which will be very interesting to see there. clearly it's the year of the AL Central because we have 3 teams from that division. The one that was, deemed as the weakest in baseball, at least last season, for a lot of people, probably at least partially, including myself, coming into this year as well. And they have 3 of the 4 remaining American League playoff spots. So pretty impressive there. And the reason why it's 3 is because it was the Kansas City Royals additionally coming out on top in their game against the Baltimore Orioles. And this is, it just goes to show how incredible that pitching staff is, because that is an offense in Baltimore that is absolutely loaded, basically top to bottom in that lineup. Being able to come out, largely unscathed. You look at the Orioles team hitting stats in this game here, where they hit 167, just a 225 on base percentage. And again, the Orioles ultimately throughout this series really struggled with capitalizing on these opportunities. Now, they at least get on the board on Wednesday after being shut out on Tuesday. They put up 1, but it's just nowhere near enough. And I understand, like I mentioned, this is very much about the Kansas City Royals pitching staff and how incredible they have been. But for the Orioles, you look at the likes of a Gunnar Henderson who goes hitless. You look at the likes of a Ryan Mountcastle, also hitless in this series. And you just feel like there were a lot more opportunities to capitalize on that they just didn't. Now, credit the Royals, it's the pitching. The defense was also one of the biggest difference makers in this series, and it's not like the Orioles were, openly bad throughout this series. It's just that they really weren't able to sort of capitalize and take away plays like we saw the Royals being able to do. You have Bobby Witt Jr., who obviously he's the MVP of this series if there were one, considering the fact that he hits the game-winning RBI in each of these 2 games. You're talking about a 1-0 win and a 2-1 win, and it's just about your best player stepping up. Bobby Witt Jr. was able to do so offensively, defensively at shortstop as well. He just finds a way to, make an impact. You have MJ Melendez making jumping catches out there in left field, and I think that you look at a situation where it is Bobby Witt Jr., him being able to beat out a ball to second base, or first base actually. And I just feel like this is a situation where, the Orioles, unfortunately for them, they're going to have these narratives around them about the lack of postseason success over these past 2 seasons. They are 0-5 this year. Again, situation where Orioles under old playoff formats wouldn't have even been playing, but it is what it is. You got to roll with the punches. You kind of were stumbling through the second half of the season to a point where the Orioles very easily could have had a bye, but they let it slip away from them, and ultimately they kind of pay the price here. And they're going to have a lot of interesting decisions coming up here. Corbin Burns, who of course was excellent for them in Game 1 and was the only reason really that game was even competitive, he's going to be a free agent. How are they going to go about this? Still a very young team, so I don't think it's any world of panic at this current moment. But that being said, there are going to be eyes on them now of can they actually get it done when it matters the most, which I think is a little bit of a tired narrative that, you're talking about a 2-3 day stretch basically. I know last year a little bit longer in that divisional series, but they talked about how last year, and it still is a little bit of a narrative of, some of these teams are hurt from the fact that there is a bye week in the first round for some of these teams. Well, the Orioles benefited from that last year, and then they still got swept by the Rangers. This year, they actually play in the first round, and they end up losing to the Royals, unable to win a game. So, again, you can make the argument any which way. I just feel like ultimately the situation is the situation. You have to capitalize on it, and Orioles unable to do so here. But again, year of the AL Central. So the Tigers and the Royals, they move on here. In the National League, we don't have full results because we did see the Milwaukee Brewers extend their series. First time in these past few seasons that we have seen a Game 3 in the wild card. So we are going to be talking about a resilient Brewers win, along with the fact that the Padres were able to sweep the Atlanta Braves. They now are locked into the NLDS, so we're going to be diving into both of those games for yesterday and the overall bigger picture there. But before we do so, we do have to take a quick break. Do not go anywhere. We will be right back.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't replaced all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the news if it's some losing shit. A stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh, I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast, as we're now going to be diving into the National League side of things, talking about the Brewers forcing a Game 3 against the Mets, and additionally the Padres finishing off the Atlanta Braves in the nightcap. So, starting with Milwaukee versus New York, this series just in general here has been giving us so much action through these first 2 days. We've seen a lot of these low-scoring pitching duels, but, you know, in Mets versus Brewers, we're just getting... It's really individualized innings and, you know, these quick momentum swings of half inning to half inning, but... You know, even with that being said, this series has just lived up to the excitement of playoff baseball, and it's been a ton of fun to watch up to this point. So it is the Brewers coming out 5-3, had to mount a little bit of a comeback effort in this one, where you have Frankie Montas versus Sean Manaea. Neither one of them were excellent in this game. You got the scoring throughout the first 2 innings, and then for a while, these teams were just sort of radio silence, especially once the bullpens came in. Thought you got a lot of excellent pitching out of the pen, especially from the Brewers in this one, considering that Montas was only able to go 3 2/3 innings. And this is... just sort of, it's been really fun, I think, up to this point in the playoffs, watching some of these younger players really emerge on a national stage. And Jackson Chourio has been the epitome of that concept, because he has been unbelievable. It was 2 hits yesterday. That was becoming the youngest player in MLB history, in postseason history, to record 2 hits in their postseason debut. And then yesterday it was Jackson Chourio, 2 home runs, one of them being a leadoff to sort of set the tone at least, and then the other one coming in the 8th inning to tie the game, get the Mets sort of back on their heels a little bit more. And then it was another young guy, maybe not quite 20 years old like Chourio, but Garrett Mitchell being able to step up to sort of slam the door with a 2-run home run himself. Definitely, I at least have seen the idea of some people questioning the bullpen usage for Carlos Mendoza and that bullpen, considering the fact that in that 8th inning, you have the top of the lineup coming up, and maybe that's a situation where you go to your $100 million closer in Edwin Diaz a little bit earlier. I understand why they played that the way that they did, considering the fact that Diaz did, throw a lot of pitches in that game on Monday, the doubleheader that they had against the Braves to even get to this situation. At that point as well, he had been coming off of, that was 2 straight days for him pitching. That I understand the fatigue. Ultimately, you're paying the guy $100 million. That is a situation where you feel like you maybe have to capitalize on it, but instead they don't, and ultimately it does burn them in that game or in this situation in the 8th inning, and that's sort of all she wrote from there, where the Mets, they had the lead for the majority of this game. Wasn't necessarily a save situation there in the bottom of the 8th inning. I understand the hesitancy to go to Edwin Diaz, but either way, people are going to play the results, and ultimately, it's not even like the Mets offense didn't produce for them at all, that they were able to get a few runs, but being 2 of 11 with runners in scoring position really is not a very good mark whatsoever. This is a team that, is still yet to really get the full power out of any of their batters throughout these first couple postseason games. I think that home run ball is going to be something that they need, and that's sort of a little bit of a no-brainer statement at this point, but you see the stats all the time about just in this modern era of baseball, the teams that out-homer the other win at a very, very high rate in the postseason, and up to this point, we just haven't seen that power yet from the Mets. We know they're capable of it, and then a little bit more of their style is just putting balls in play. And if that's how you want to go about it, sure, but you got to capitalize on those situations when you get them. You leave 9 runners on base, and that's just obviously not a winning recipe, especially when I don't think that the Mets pitching is necessarily at that elite level. So ultimately, the Mets fall in this one, sets the stage for what should be an excellent Game 3 tonight. That game begins at 7 o'clock p.m. Eastern, so we will definitely be back tomorrow with some overall thoughts on that game. But sort of to wrap up yesterday's action, the San Diego Padres advancing past the Atlanta Braves. The Braves made things interesting late in this game with a push in the 8th inning, but at the end of the day, you can only do so much, I think, against this Padres bullpen, where especially at the back end of it, of the 3-headed monster, I suppose you could call it, of a Tanner Scott, of a Jason Adam, and of a Robert Suarez, that it's just too much ground to make up ultimately. And especially when Joe Musgrove goes down with that injury, which is definitely a huge factor moving forward here for the Padres going into their next series. It's not like they're totally short-handed. They still have Michael King. They still have Dylan Cease. They still have Yu Darvish. It's not like they were at a shortage of pitchers in the first place, but is definitely going to be something to monitor there. I believe they're listing it as an elbow injury, so potentially very serious. But that being said, Braves, you got to get on that sort of boat a little bit earlier in the game, where you have a bullpen that they're going to have to be strung out a little bit more, and they just weren't really able to capitalize in the same way there. And ultimately, they struck first at least. They got on the board. Michael Harris Jr., by the way, far and away the best player on the Braves through this postseason appearance, which again, moral victories aren't really a thing, especially when you come around to the playoffs. But knowing that Michael Harris Jr. able to sort of put behind him the demons of the postseason past, that he's clearly capable of doing it. He was excellent, 3 hits in this game, ended up hitting the home run as well to sort of get things a little bit closer towards the end there. But again, at that point, it was just a little too late in that situation, and I feel like I get it. It is a very frustrating situation for Braves fans to come this close once again, at least making the playoffs and coming short. Feels like for the past couple seasons, they've had some golden opportunities. I mean, obviously, they just won. They can't be feeling too bad about themselves considering they just won a few years ago. That being said, though, there's very high expectations for this Braves team. And for whatever it's worth, again, moral victories are not really a thing when it comes to postseason ball. But the way that they were able to overcome all of the different injuries throughout this season, of starting early in the year when it's Spencer Strider, him getting knocked out for the year, then Ronald Acuna, Austin Riley, and then having Chris Sale drop out of the picture as well, your Cy Young pitcher, right before the playoffs. I mean, unfortunately, it just kind of never was the Braves' year, and yet they were still able to put together a pretty successful season of winning 89 games and making the postseason. I know that Braves fans don't really want to hear that right now, but they're all going to be back next season as well. So it's not like the Braves are going to be at any sort of point of truly having to find what their identity is or make key moves. They already are in a situation where they can roll back this team into next year pretty well, all things considered, and I think that they are going to be in a good place. That being said, the Padres have been a wagon throughout the second half of the season. They were, at this point, given where those two teams are at this current moment, they were the better team. They had home field advantage. They get it done. Petco is rocking, and they are moving on to face the Dodgers in what I think might just be the best series of this entire playoffs. Now, we'll see. Still have a lot of matchups to see, a lot of ball to play, but I do think that Padres versus Dodgers is going to be electrifying. Division rivals, I think two of the best teams in baseball as a whole, so should be a lot of fun to watch there. If you have any predictions, let us know in the comments section. But again, we'll sort of be rounding out, maybe diving into a little bit of a preview tomorrow after we have the full divisional round playoffs in front of us. But that being said, we are going to be switching gears a little bit, and we're going to be diving into tonight's Thursday night football matchup between the Atlanta Falcons and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. We're going to be breaking down some of the keys to the game from both sides, and ultimately I will be making my prediction on this game. So we're going to be diving into that. But before we do so, we are going to take a quick break. Do not go anywhere. We will be right back.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast, as we are going to be previewing tonight's matchup between the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and the Atlanta Falcons, a divisional matchup, NFC South showdown, where I think that all of these games through the past couple seasons have just been such toss-ups that it is going to be pretty difficult to come to a great guess on actual predictions here, but we're going to do our best, and in order to sort of get to that conclusion, do want to talk about some of the keys to this game. Now, we're going to start on the Atlanta offense. This is a group that obviously has the most pressure, I think, out of anything in this game, considering the fact that obviously Kirk Cousins being signed in the offseason, so much was made of. Now with all of these pieces in Pitts, London, and Bijan Robinson, that eventually they are going to come together and be able to have some real success together. But we're still sort of waiting on finding that dynamic aspect of this offense. Last week, they were able to win the game against the Saints without even scoring an offensive touchdown. So it's not like this is exactly the high-flying start that we were anticipating. But that being said, I think there's been a lot of positives with this group, and the number one key for their success is being able to keep Kirk Cousins clean in the pocket, because we have seen two drastically different versions of Cousins throughout this season up to this point, of when he is pressured in the pocket versus when he's able to hang in there and make the throws downfield. And it's been really ugly when he has had defenders in his face. All four of his interceptions have come under duress, and I just think that at this point, given his age, given the fact you think about the concept of him being able to sort of follow through, exploding off of that back leg and the Achilles that he tore, he just doesn't really seem to have the same arm strength, but it's less about his arm and more so about the entire process of him being able to wind up to make those downfield throws. And a lot of the time, with the pressure in his face, you just see him sort of having these short throws, wobbly throws, and I think that he's much better than that. But there's also real limitations in a quarterback that is in his age 36 season, I believe, and is dealing with, still recovering at least to some degree, from a very serious Achilles tear. Now, you look at what the Buccaneers have defensively. They are one of the highest blitzing teams in the NFL, third highest rate in the league through 4 games. I have been maybe a little bit disappointed with overall their defense. I thought that this was a group that could sort of take that next step this year, looking at some of their younger pieces like a Yaya Diaby and Kalijah Kancey to really take those next steps. Now, they're still a solid group. You're also missing Antoine Winfield for at least last week. I think he's going to be out again this week, at least based off of some of the early research I was doing on the inactives tonight. So that injuries play a part of it, but that's just the NFL. That's football. That's something you have to overcome. That being said, though, even if I have been slightly disappointed in Tampa Bay because they haven't reached, top 10 status or anything like that, they are still at the top of the league in terms of a lot of advanced analytics pressure rates, where it's hurry percentage, knockdown percentage, pressure percentage. They are still in that top third-ish of the league, that they're going to be able to knock Kirk Cousins off of his spot a little bit, or at least they're going to have the chance to. Who is going to win that battle up front between the offensive line and Tampa's front seven? Now, sort of sticking with a similar theme there as well, can the Falcons take advantage in the run game? Because I was personally at least expecting better than 100 rush yards per game from them. Their offensive line hasn't been awful, but it's not winning up front as much as it probably should be, or at least what I expected them to be able to do. The Falcons only ran the ball 15 times last game against a tough defensive front in the Saints, who are one of the better run-stopping defenses in the league. But I still feel like it's an opportunity where, just with this group, knowing that you have Bijan and Tyler Algier, both of who are very impactful players in that running game and can provide a little bit of finesse and power combination that I was hoping the Falcons were going to be able to establish the run game a little bit more. I think if they do, it allows for Kirk Cousins to be able to excel in his role a little bit more because teams have to respect the run more. That being said, it's a tough defensive front for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Vita Vea is one of the best interior defensive linemen in the NFL. They are going to be without Kalijah Kancey in this game, it appears. And if that is the case, there is definitely room for Bijan Robinson to get going. And ultimately what I'm getting at here is I do think so much of this team's identity is going to come down to that offensive line and their ability to move the ball, move opposing defenses, and keep Kirk Cousins clean. That is sort of almost the embodiment of who the Falcons are in my eyes. On the other side of this, with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, I think the number one thing that they have to do, or at least attempt to do, is continue to build on the run game success that they saw last week against the Eagles. Last season, they were the worst team in the league in rush yards per game with 88.8, but now they have Bucky Irving in the backfield, rookie that they drafted out of Oregon. He's been a pretty productive player when he's gotten opportunities up to this point. They haven't necessarily been great, but last week they had 111 yards and averaged over 4 yards per carry. Those are numbers that I do think Buccaneers fans should feel at least slightly optimistic. Rome wasn't built in a day, but to be able to continue to establish a little more of an even attack, considering, I love Baker Mayfield as much as the next guy. I think when he has to go into ultimate playmaker mode, almost a little bit of a Josh Allen style run around making plays, I think that's when the Buccaneers really start to run into trouble. We saw that a little bit against the Broncos a couple weeks ago where, that offensive line wasn't good. That Denver Broncos defense has been one of the most overperforming in a complementary way units in the NFL up to this point. But still need, better results on the offensive line. And Baker Mayfield, he was also sort of running into traffic as well, not making great decisions, threw an interception in that game. So I think that he needs to be a little bit more clean in those instances. It also does wonders for that offense as a whole if Baker's able to have a competent run game to add to that mix as well. And like I mentioned, Bucky Irving, he seems to be somebody who can really take on a bigger role for this Tampa Bay team. It seems like the Falcons may be without Troy Anderson, their best linebacker, and I think is emerging as one of the top, at least run-stopping linebackers in the NFL through the first quarter of the season. So that hasn't exactly been confirmed yet, but dealing with a knee injury, hasn't been participating in practice these past couple days on a short week. I am maybe a little skeptical about his, ability to play tonight. We will see. I'm hoping for it because, again, I've had a lot of fun watching him, former FCS guy from Montana State. But if he isn't there, that is a huge difference maker for the Falcons' run-stopping offense, which has been fine at times, but still not excellent. And when they have been good, a lot of it's been because of Troy Anderson. So that's something that I am definitely keeping an eye on as well, and I think that you should too if you are going to pick this game. So that being said, I have to pick this game right now before we have the final injury reports, and I think in this game I am leaning with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, where they are on the road, which I don't necessarily love, but I also think that they are the better team overall. Again, just sort of waiting on the Falcons to actually come into their own offensively. You look at the games that they've won, 0 offensive touchdowns in that game against the Saints. The Eagles game sort of just came down to the fact that the Eagles weren't able to properly close that out. I think we don't want to play the hypothetical game here, but the Falcons could be looking at a worse record. I don't know if this is going to be the place for them to be able to correct that. Now, again, the fact that it's on the road for Baker and this Buccaneers team, I don't love, but Falcons are 2.5-point favorites, and I would take the Bucs to cover that. Maybe if you want to play it safe, by 0.5 point or a point to 3.5. But I think the Bucs can win outright as well, and that is my pick for this game for the Buccaneers to, technically speaking, upset. But it's an NFC South matchup. It's going to be gritty, we know that, and also just in any of these divisional matchups, it's always so hard to predict because I feel like a lot of times with these NFC South teams, you're kind of just picking out of a hat in terms of what version of these teams you're actually going to get. But let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section on this game. We're now going to be diving into some power rankings for the upcoming week. I'm going to be listing my top 10 teams in the NFL entering week 5. So we are going to dive into that, but before we do so, we do have to take a quick break. Do not go anywhere. We will be right back.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast, as we are now going to be diving into this week's version of Power Rankings, as I'm going to be listing my top 10 NFL teams entering week 5. Now, these are obviously just my opinions. The way I typically do these are, if these teams were to play tomorrow, who would win in a game? Now, can't fully take that. There are other things under consideration as well, a little bit of upside. So without further ado, diving into this for our first number 10 team, I have the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And this is a situation where the Bucs, when you're talking about the body of work up to this point, I mean, they could definitely be higher. There is absolutely a case for that. And to that, I would just say I still have worries about the inconsistency of this team. I'm talking about a group where they won the division last year. Even in that, though, you did see sort of the varying back and forth of what version you are going to get. I think that to some degree, I might just have to stomach that the Buccaneers are still the best team in this NFC South division. I feel like it's just so crowded, though, and really nobody has definitively taken that crown just yet, that the Buccaneers have an opportunity to do so tonight against the Falcons. I do think that they win that game, and I think that they are worthy of being in the top 10. But there are also a number of other teams as well that are in the mix. I don't have Washington Commanders in here, which has been a huge riser on a lot of people's list. I'm still sort of just waiting to see, them get it done against a more legitimate defense. Again, you can talk about the Seahawks, who are 3-1 as well. So this number 10, these really bottom 8 to 10 teams I was struggling with a bit. So if you have thoughts in the comments section, definitely feel free to let me know. Number 9, I have the Green Bay Packers. Listen, they lose last week against the Vikings, but that is a legitimately good Vikings team, and it was Jordan Love's first game back from injury. That this is a team that clearly is more than just the quarterback. They were able to hang in there with Malik Willis, going 2-0 in those couple of games against the Colts and the Titans. Not extremely high level of competition, maybe. That being said, though, for what Malik Willis's, general perception was in the NFL entering this season, I think that that's pretty impressive. And Jordan Love looked a little bit uncomfortable, looked like he was playing his first game back from injury, but I think that he's going to get right, and once the Packers do start clicking, I anticipate them climbing up this list even higher. Number 8, I have the Philadelphia Eagles, and this is where I feel gross about it, is the fact that I do have the Eagles over the Buccaneers, even though the Buccaneers did just sort of stomp Philadelphia. Probably should have the Eagles lower right now based off of injuries, but I still think it's a very talented team. I think that, when they are firing on all cylinders, I think the ceiling is highest there, so they're maybe they probably edged out the Buccaneers more than anything based off of what I think they can do, not based off of as much what they've shown, which is maybe a little bit disingenuous, but again, it's my list over it's my list. You can have your own list, but I do have the Eagles at 8 here. They are a team that definitely the pressure is mounting for them after this loss, but I do still feel like once they get their players back, I think they're going to be the best team in the NFC East. That's what I'm anticipating, but if you disagree, let me know why in the comments section. Number 7, I have the Houston Texans. The Texans are a very good team on paper and on the field as well. They do perform. Now, coming off back-to-back weeks where it's been a little bit underwhelming with them. Last week, getting blown out to the Vikings. This week, just barely eking out a game against the Jaguars. I mean, it is a divisional game, at least, if you want to defend them in that sense, which I guess I'm choosing to as well. I still believe in the process with this team. I think that they are a good roster. Not their best showing these past couple weeks, but they have talent galore on both sides of the ball, and I do think that they are going to be ultimately, one of the top contenders in the AFC. That being said, have to get that running back room healthy. Right now, I don't think they can run the ball whatsoever, and it is absolutely hurting them. Once they get, the likes of a Joe Mixon and a Dameon Pierce back to some degree, I think that they can take further steps forward. Number 6, I have the Buffalo Bills. Get knocked down a handful of spots. Had them at number 2 coming into last week. And ultimately, my fears with them of being shorthanded defensively and a little bit on the offensive side of the ball as well in terms of playmakers did come true in that game against the Ravens. And, I think it's specifically on the defensive side of the ball. Sean McDermott has shown that he is an excellent defensive coach. When you're missing your top 2 linebackers, that is an extremely difficult thing to overcome. So, I think that it's a little bit about the personnel here. The Bills, based off of having Josh Allen, having good coaching, and ultimately not being a bad roster as a whole, but one that is a little bit shorthanded and I don't think does match up quite the same on paper with a bunch of these other teams. I did have to knock them down a few pegs based off of the fashion in which they lost against the Ravens last week. Number 5, I have the San Francisco 49ers. I still feel like this is a little bit lower. This is more so about where we're talking about them right now as a team. They are still overcoming some of these injuries without 2 of their best players on the defensive side of the ball in Dre Greenlaw and now Javon Hargrave as well. The offense where they are back at least to some degree. You get George Kittle back. You have Deebo Samuel coming back as well. I think that they are extremely talented and they are going to get there. I do still feel like kind of have to prove it a little bit more. These other teams in front of them right now have had some statement wins. I just don't think that we've seen that from the 49ers just yet, and for that reason, I do have them a little bit lower, but this is easily a top 5 team in the NFL, probably higher when they are fully healthy. So ultimately, bump them up a few spots from last week to this week. Patriots win only gets you so far, though. Number 4, I have the Baltimore Ravens. And this is, I understand people are going to point to that Raiders loss and sort of hold that against them. I think early in the year, eventually we are just going to have to learn once we have a greater sample size to not put so much weight and emphasis on individual games. The Ravens are still a very good team. Yes, their offensive line looked a little bit sloppier early in the season. 3 new starters will do that to you, but ultimately, it's not a bad group. Even still, this past week, without one of their starting offensive lineman Andrew Voorhees, and they're still able to dominate the Bills in the run game. They found their identity, which is being able to run the heck out of the ball, and that's what they've showed in these past 2 wins against the Cowboys and the Bills. 2 teams that, definitely are flawed against the run, but I think that this is still the path for the Ravens, and I am still a believer, as much as other people want to knock Lamar Jackson down because we haven't seen him, pass through, have these big passing games in the playoffs just yet. I do think that he's capable of it. The defense is still very good, especially in the front 7. I think that they are pretty clearly a top 5 team in the NFL as well. Number 3 is the Minnesota Vikings. You just can't really ignore what they've been able to do so far this season. Second half of last week was maybe slightly concerning as Jordan Love did start to get his rhythm a little bit. The defense started locking in. Sam Darnold, some turnovers as well that sort of let the Packers at least back into this game. So I don't think you can fully just ignore the second half of that game. But statement wins, dominating wins, for the most part, against the 49ers, the Texans, and the Packers. 3 teams that I have in the top 9, I guess, technically speaking, here on this list. Again, though, I think the Packers are probably even better than that once Jordan Love does get in a rhythm. So, Vikings, they are an extremely talented roster as a whole. They get Jordan Addison back. They're going to have TJ Hawkinson back shortly as well. You got weapons on offense. You have a defense that's firing on cylinders with all of their new pieces. Brian Flores still blitzing the heck out of the ball as well, where the Vikings are second in the league in blitz rate. This is a very well-coached team, and they might just have, I have a hard time saying anybody's better than Patrick Mahomes, but if you want to take sample size of what's going on so far this season and maybe just flat out talent as a whole, Justin Jefferson is absolutely filthy and is maybe the most valuable player in the NFL up to this point so far. Touchdowns in every game. He is unbelievable. You get a weapon like Jordan Addison who complements him extremely well. This offense is only going to continue to get better as they return all of these pieces. So the Vikings do sit at 3. Number 2, I have the Detroit Lions. The Lions still haven't necessarily been the full version of what I think that they can be. Last week was a lot of good signs, though, and I understand the Seahawks had some key losses on the defensive side of the ball. Some people want to make arguments that if they did have those front 7 players, that the Seahawks would have won that game. Like I've said a million times on this show, I don't really like to play the hypotheticals. I just know the Lions' offense was firing on all cylinders, and their identity is still very much intact, which is dominating up front, establishing the run, and finally we got that Jared Goff game that at least I've been waiting for, post-contract extension. Can you show that you are, worthy of that money? 3 weeks, it was too small of a sample size to overreact. You end up getting a perfect game out of him on Monday Night Football against a good Seahawks team last week. This is what I think they're capable of doing. I think their defense has room for growth as well. They have a lot of these nice young pieces. Brian Branch, though, it's really the secondary that I'm looking at. Brian Branch missed last game because of an illness. You still have a developing Terrion Arnold who he's picked up too many penalties up to this point in the year, absolutely. But he is, I think, a great talent. There's a reason why they spent a first-round pick on him. I think that he will figure it out as the year goes on. Love the additions that they've added as well. Speaking of penalties, Carlton Davis, based off of how Monday night went against DK Metcalf, also one of the most physical receivers in the league. But him, Amik Robertson, Terrion Arnold, that secondary is going to get better. And Mel Fonwu also out as well, I might add as well. But number 1 team, still the Kansas City Chiefs. Now, injuries are piling up for them, which is a big concern. That being said, though, I cannot move off of them because, frankly, I don't think that there's any team in the NFL that looks like they're playing flawless football up to this point. The closest you could get, honestly, is the Minnesota Vikings, but the way that I like to look at this, especially at the top, if these 2 teams were to play in a Super Bowl tomorrow, who do I think would win? I just think that Patrick Mahomes has the clutch gene and he will be able to pull games out. We saw developments from Travis Kelce in this game where he maybe is starting to awaken. There is still that little element of a Xavier Worthy. Can he be involved in these deep shots? Now you add, at least a viable run backup option right now in Kareem Hunt. We'll see how that sort of develops as these weeks go on, and we're still waiting on the Isaiah Pacheco update. But, they have some different looks that they can throw at you from a running back perspective. I don't know if any of them are elite necessarily, but all still pretty solid options, at least as to what it seems. One of the best offensive lines in the league, still a very good defense. So that is my top 10. Let me know what you agree and disagree with in the comment section. But now I want to dive into the Davante Adams landing spots because it seems like he may have actually just played his last game in a Raiders jersey. Yesterday I talked about the fact that I didn't think a holdout would last the entire season, but bridges appear to have been burnt on that front, so I want to talk about, more specifically speaking, not who I do think he will go to, but just sort of talk things out about what impact would he have on some of these top, trade candidates. But before we get into that, we are going to take our final break of the show. Do not go anywhere. We will be right back. Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast for our final segment of the day, where I want to dive into the different landing spots for Davante Adams and, less so talk about the logistics of whether or not it could happen, but just from a football perspective, hypothetically, if Davante were to end up in these different spots, then I just want to talk about what that would look like from an impact on the football field perspective. So I want to start off with the New York Jets because that is the team that has obviously been the most heavily rumored up to this point. I think it would be all the world of a difference, honestly, for the Jets. And I'm not saying it would solve every single one of their problems. I still feel like they've had a pretty hard time running between the tackles. Their offensive line, I think, is good overall, but obviously this past week, so much talk about the cadence and everything like that. I'm not worried whatsoever. I think their offensive line will be just fine ultimately. But there's been a lot of dysfunction on that offense. A lot of it has been Aaron Rodgers not being able to get on the same page with his weapons. And I think it would be a seamless transition of bringing Davante Adams in, having him be able to also lead the way on the rest of the team. I think that maybe you can make the argument, and I saw somebody on ESPN earlier this morning making the argument of, you are going to stunt the growth of a Garrett Wilson. Ultimately, the Jets know that this season is all about winning a championship, and I don't think that they're at that level right now. Davante Adams jumpstarts your offense to getting to another place. Now, maybe it makes Garrett Wilson a little bit unhappy. He's still going to play these football games, and ultimately, again, it's just kind of this year or bust. There is no plan B after this season, and maybe it's Aaron Rodgers playing another year after this. We'll have to see. I'm sure that it's way too early to have that conversation at this moment. The Jets need to be able to, find what their identity is on the offensive side of the ball. I think that Davante Adams would do miracles for that Jets offense. I talked about before yesterday that this is, I think, the clear choice of where Adams should end up. I think that, another team that we'll talk about, again, taking logistics out of it, I don't think the Raiders, there's any world really where they trade him to the Chiefs. But hypothetically, what would Adams look like on the Chiefs? And the answer would be devastating, because I think that Adams sort of provides almost the similar skill set that I think Rashee Rice was beginning to, but do so at a Hall of Fame level, where Rice was finding a way to really, build up his skills of a route runner and finding open space. And Davante Adams can do all of that. He can also play a little bit bigger in the red zone. And I think it would take a ton of pressure as well off of, again, Kelce, who we just talked about in the last segment. Seems like he showed some signs of life this past week against the Chargers. I still don't know if I'm fully buying into, is that super sustainable, because during the regular season last year, he was the number one option and basically the only option, and it resulted in a fine offensive season, but they were also very mediocre in terms of being a scoring offense. I think it was the first time out of the top 6 or so that the Chiefs have been, or the first time that the Chiefs have been out of the top 6, something along those lines, since Mahomes took over with the Chiefs. And that's just obviously not what you hope for out of having the best quarterback in the NFL. You need more. And it can't all be on his shoulders. That a move like this would be revolutionary for that offense. I think it opens up a lot of that intermediate game, gives you extra attention, even more so than you were getting with Rashee Rice, and it does sort of continue to open up even more opportunities, probably inherently, for Xavier Worthy. That, I think a little bit of a similar comp, obviously different players entirely, but you look at having Justin Jefferson on the Vikings, you bring back Jordan Addison, who I still think is a little bit more polished than Xavier Worthy, but, Justin Jefferson, he does a lot of the stuff in the middle of the field. Davante Adams can do that, and it also just sort of sucks extra attention towards him where you have guys like Jordan Addison running free. I think the same would be for Xavier Worthy, able to get those extra opportunities if Davante Adams is drawing that much attention, which I am sure he would. I am not worried about the lack of production that we've seen over these past couple years. The Raiders are a little bit of a mess there. So I think that, again, talking purely hypotheticals here, and while we stick with the hypotheticals, we might as well talk about the Dallas Cowboys, who supposedly don't have any interest in Davante Adams up to this point, which doesn't shock me, knowing how hesitant the Cowboys usually are to move off of draft capital, which is slightly infuriating because I also just don't think that they've been that great of a drafting team in recent years, and that's part of the reason why they have so many holes, especially on that defensive side of the ball. But Davante Adams, it's a situation where any team should have at least some interest in him. Logistically, though, I don't know if it is necessarily worth the investment that it would cost the Cowboys to make a deal like this. They still have unfinished deals on the table, specifically looking at Micah Parsons. But, on that note, the defense has as many holes as it does. The offensive line still isn't very good. The running back room isn't all that talented. That I think there are a lot of other issues. It is true that CD is the only real playmaker that the Cowboys currently have on offense. So adding Davante Adams objectively, of course, would make them better, but it wouldn't make me feel all that different about what I currently do, which is that they have issues, I think, just about everywhere outside of that quarterback and wide receiver one position. That, maybe when their defense is fully healthier, they have a better secondary, they have some edge rushers, but there's just too many holes right now, I think, and it would make them a lot more fun of an offense, definitely a lot more dynamic. I mean, we've seen, last week the Cowboys playing against the Giants. We saw CD lining up in the backfield, getting a little bit creative there. They would be able to move pieces around and get defenses confused, but I don't think it would ultimately change who they are. It would make their passing game a little bit better. It would probably boost their stats, but I would still have all the same problems that I do currently have with them, and I don't think that having Davante Adams on the roster as well would fix those issues, even on the offensive side of the ball. But some of the other teams, Buffalo Bills, I think would be extremely interesting as well. Talking about the Bills sort of losing Stephon Diggs, having that be a huge deal in the offseason, and then getting an upgrade in Davante Adams for a little bit of a discounted price, feels like that would be elite. And I think that Davante Adams would be kind of the perfect piece to Josh Allen, where you look at those plays like he had on Sunday night, where he was basically, it was the first drive of the second half, and he's rolling to the right, he's basically running out of bounds, and he's able to find a Khalil Shakir 30 or so yards down the field, and he's able to pick up a gain ultimately of something like 50 yards, where those big play potentials would be, everywhere for the Bills, that you would have so many different layers to the offense, where you now have a developed run game with James Cook. That offensive line has been incredible up to this point, so they can be a little bit more traditional there. But then when you do get the, head on fire Josh Allen, you have a player that can basically get to the ball from any position, running deep. You have so much extra attention that's sort of wrapped up in him. I think it probably does, open up a lot more opportunities for the likes of a Khalil Shakir, some of their tight ends, and Kincaid and Knox, who are good players. None of them are number one receiving threats, though. And I think just adding that makes the entire receiving core that much better. I think it adds, again, plays very well into the Josh Allen crazy person offense that sometimes they need to unhinge when they get desperate. That I think it would be a ton of fun to watch that. And again, we talked about this earlier in the show. I do feel like they still have some losses and deficiencies on defense, but come playoff time, if that defense is healthy, Matt Milano, Terrell Bernard back playing for them, we saw that the Bills defense is able to play well enough to, be competitive in some of these games against opposing teams. And, again, maybe got run on in the Arizona game and in the Baltimore game. They wouldn't be perfect, but I do feel like it would be a situation where the Bills can be considered, the number one team in the NFL, which it's not that they can't now. I mean, a lot of people had them number one in the power rankings coming into last week, but I do feel like this is a situation where, the Bills, they could take their game up a whole nother level. Another team that I want to at least mention here that, Patriots legend Jason McCourty brought up earlier today on ESPN and such. I think it's Jason. Him and Devin look too similar for me, but whichever one of the McCourtys, I think it's Jason that works at ESPN. He was talking about the Washington Commanders as a potential destination for Davante Adams as well, and I think it would be a ton of fun. Now, I'd maybe have a little bit of sympathy for Terry McLaurin, who finally now has a quarterback that, he can be the number one option for, and then you would go out and get a bigger name receiver than him, and maybe he doesn't get the same amount of looks. Terry McLaurin's had so much patience up to this point that based off of what we know about his personality at this point and all the sort of behind the scenes stories that at least I personally have heard about him, I think it's about the process for him, and I think he would just be on board to field a really competitive team once again. I'm sure that McLaurin would still get all of his opportunities as well. It's not like Davante Adams would come in and steal all the shine. I do think there's a good chance he would take a lot of the shine, though. So McLaurin, again, been through so much in Washington. You're talking about Jaden Daniels is his 11th quarterback since McLaurin was drafted to Washington in 2019, that I feel like he would like some sense of stability now that things are rounding the corner. But again, I don't want to speculate on what McLaurin's reaction to that would be. In terms of on the field, though, it would be a ton of fun as well, as it is this Washington offense that's up and coming. And I think it would really do wonders for Jaden Daniels for continuing to push the ball further and further downfield, where that is something that, during the first couple games, over 50% of his completions were at or behind the line of scrimmage. And we're starting to see him take those deeper shots. You got the way deeper shots with Terry McLaurin, specifically in that Week 3 game against the Bengals, but I'm talking about maybe in that 10, 15, 20-yard range as well, those intermediate throws that I do think that Jaden Daniels did pretty well for himself this past week against the Cardinals. Really, other than that interception where it probably pushed it even a little bit further downfield than that. But I do feel like Davante Adams would be able to add this extra element at this point. And again, this is why I say that I don't think it would take away too many targets from Terry McLaurin. They really don't have a wide receiver 2 at this current point. I know, if you listen to the broadcasts, they talk about Zacchaeus and the role that he can potentially have moving forward. But Davante Adams would be, obviously, and again, you want to talk about wide receiver 1, 2, I think it would be more like a 1A, 1B situation. And that's where you can see sort of even bigger steps. Again, Zacchaeus, he might just be good enough to be able to hold on to his wide receiver 2 role. But I think we all know that Davante Adams would be a much better, top 2 target for Washington. And I think it could do wonders as well for, the growth of Jaden Daniels, that Davante Adams seems like within the past year or so, he's learned a little bit more of the selflessness. He's talked about the idea of he can be on board with getting a little bit less targets as long as there is an actual functioning offense. Well, the Commanders seem to be a very highly functioning offense. I think we'd learn a ton about Jaden Daniels himself if he was gifted with somebody like Davante Adams on top of having Terry McLaurin as well. That I gotta sort of get this out of my mind, of this idea of putting up a rookie season similar to CJ Stroud. I'm not saying that necessarily, but you could be looking at, what's already been off to a very high start. You're looking at highest completion percentage by any player in NFL history through the first 4 weeks of a season. That is Jaden Daniels. We talked about the stat yesterday. I think it's at 82%. I can double check that here. I have it somewhere in my notes. 82.1%. So already pretty impressive, but we could be reaching new heights in terms of the explosiveness, the dynamic aspects of this offense. So I think it would be a lot of fun. But if you have another team you want to hear my thoughts on how Davante Adams would fit in their system, drop a comment. Let us know what you want to hear about as well. But that is all the time we have for today. Thank you very much for tuning into the GSMC Sports Podcast. Thank you to the GSMC Sports Network for allowing us to host this show. Remember to like, follow, subscribe wherever you keep up with us. Be sure to check us out on social media as well, and we will be back at 2:00 p.m. Eastern tomorrow afternoon. We'll have thoughts on tonight's game for the Thursday night football game, Falcons-Buccaneers. We'll talk a little bit of baseball as well with that Game 3 matchup. So, whole lot to dive into tomorrow. Do not want to miss it. We will see you then. Take care.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that crazy.